Admiral Sarah Chun stood on the observation deck of the UES Defiance, watching the blue marble of Earth shrink in the viewport. The planet that had birthed humanity now existed as little more than a memory in the rear displays. 6 months had passed since the Galactic Council's final transmission, the one that had changed everything. All human vessels are hereby ordered to withdraw beyond the Oort cloud boundary. Earth is declared a quarantine system. Any attempt to establish contact with Council member species will result in immediate military action. The message had been broadcast across every human colony, every space station, every mining platform scattered throughout the Sol system. No explanation, no trial, no chance for appeal. Humanity had simply been deemed unworthy of galactic civilization and cast out like unwanted refuse. Chen remembered the chaos that followed. Panic in the orbital stations. Desperate calls from the lunar colonies. The frantic evacuation of research outposts scattered across the outer planets. In 48 hours, humanity had been forced to abandon everything they'd built beyond Earth's atmosphere. "Admiral," came a voice from behind her. Chen turned to see Commander Marcus Webb approaching, his expression grim. "The Fleet Admiralty is requesting your presence in the war room." Chen nodded, taking one last look at the stars beyond Earth's protective embrace. Somewhere out there, beyond the vast emptiness of interstellar space, the Galactic Council continued their business as if humanity had never existed. They had no idea what they'd unleashed. The war room buzzed with activity as Chen entered. Holographic displays showed star charts, fleet movements, and resource allocations. 36 of humanity's finest military minds worked around chronometer, planning something that would have been unthinkable just months before. Fleet Admiral Torres looked up from a tactical display as Chen approached. "Sarah, good timing. We've just received confirmation from the Centauri expedition. The preliminary surveys are complete." Chen felt her pulse quicken. What did they find? Torres manipulated the holographic display, bringing up a three-dimensional map of the Alpha Centauri system. 3 habitable worlds. 2 already show signs of basic atmospheric processing from previous terraforming attempts. The third is a garden world that rivals Earth in every measurable way. Previous terraforming? Chen raised an eyebrow. Someone else was there first? The Zephyrians, Admiral Park interjected from across the room. Records show they began terraforming operations roughly 200 years ago, but abandoned the system during their expansion into the Vega sector. Standard Council doctrine. They moved on to more strategically valuable systems and left these worlds to return to their natural states. Chen studied the display, her mind racing through possibilities. Distance from the nearest Council outpost? 47 light years, Torres replied. Far enough to avoid immediate attention, close enough for us to establish secure supply lines back to Sol. And the other systems we've surveyed? Commander Webb stepped forward, his tablet displaying a list of stellar coordinates. 17 star systems within 50 light years of Earth. 8 contain habitable or terraformable worlds. 3 show evidence of abandoned infrastructure from various Council species. None are currently claimed or occupied. Chen felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. They exiled us to empty space, assuming we'd wither and die in isolation. They have no idea how resourceful desperate humans can be. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Admiral Park was the first to speak. "You're talking about colonization on a massive scale. We'd need to move millions of people, establish entire industrial bases, create self-sufficient ecosystems. We'd need ships," added Commander Webb. "Lots of them. The evacuation fleet is impressive, but colonizing multiple star systems requires a completely different kind of infrastructure." Torres nodded grimly. "The Council ships that escorted us out of Sol, they reported our fleet strength at roughly 1,200 vessels. Impressive for a species they considered primitive, but hardly enough to establish an interstellar empire." Chun turned to face the assembled officers, her voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "Then, we build more ships. We build better ships. We take everything the Council taught us about their technology, and we improve on it." Dr. Elizabeth Harper, the fleet's chief technology officer, looked up from her workstation. "Admiral, with respect, Council technology is centuries ahead of anything we developed independently. Their faster-than-light drives, their energy weapons, their shield systems. We barely understand how they work, let alone how to improve them. Do we? Chen challenged. Or do we understand them differently than they do? Harper frowned. I'm not sure I follow. Chen moved to the central display, bringing up technical specifications for a standard council cruiser. Look at their ship designs. Elegant, efficient, built for specific roles within their organized fleets. Each vessel is a masterpiece of specialized engineering. That's correct, Harper agreed. And completely inflexible, Chen continued. Their destroyers can't function as carriers. Their science vessels can't engage in combat. Their military doctrine assumes every species will fight exactly as they expect. Admiral Park leaned forward, understanding beginning to dawn in his eyes. But humans don't fight like other species. Exactly. Chen highlighted sections of the ship specifications. We adapt. We improvise. We take systems designed for one purpose and use them for something completely different. The Council exiled us because we don't fit their neat categories of civilization. Commander Webb was studying the display intently. You're suggesting we redesign their technology using human engineering principles. I'm suggesting we make it better, Chen replied. The Council has grown complacent. They've had the same basic technology for thousands of years, with only incremental improvements. They've forgotten what it's like to innovate out of necessity. Dr. Harper's expression shifted from skepticism to excitement. The modular approach. If we could create ships with interchangeable systems, vessels that could be reconfigured for different missions. Now you're thinking like a human, Chen smiled. The Council sees our unpredictability as a flaw. We're going to make it our greatest strength. Over the following weeks, the human fleet spread out across the local stellar neighborhood like seeds on fertile ground. Each expedition carried not just colonists and supplies, but the blueprints for a new kind of civilization. One that would emerge from the darkness between the stars stronger and more dangerous than anything the galaxy had seen. The first priority was Alpha Centauri. The Defiance led a convoy of 200 ships toward the system, carrying nearly 500,000 colonists and the industrial equipment necessary to establish a major shipyard. If humanity was going to build an empire, they needed a place to forge the tools of expansion. Captain James Riley commanded the advanced scout ship Pioneer, pushing ahead of the main fleet to establish preliminary landing sites on the garden world designated New Terra. His reports painted a picture of almost unbelievable opportunity. Vast continents of fertile soil, oceans teeming with compatible marine life, and mountain ranges rich with the heavy metals essential for starship construction. It's like someone designed this planet specifically for human colonization, Riley transmitted to the Defiance. Atmospheric composition is 0.73% oxygen, well within acceptable parameters. Gravity is 1.08 standard. Even the day-night cycle is 26 hours, close enough to Earth normal that circadian adjustment should be minimal. Chen studied Riley's survey data with growing amazement. The Zephyrians had indeed begun terraforming operations, but they'd done so using biological principles that happened to favor conditions ideal for human physiology. Their abandoned atmospheric processors had continued operating autonomously for 2 centuries, steadily converting the planet's atmosphere to something remarkably similar to Earth's. It's almost too good to be true, Admiral Torres observed, looking over Chen's shoulder at the incoming data. Maybe that's exactly what it is, Chen replied thoughtfully. Maybe the galaxy is full of worlds like this, perfect for colonization, but ignored by the Council because they already control everything they think they need. Dr. Harper looked up from her workstation. The abandoned Zephyrian infrastructure is fascinating. Their atmospheric processors are built on completely different principles than anything in the current Council archives. More efficient, more adaptive to local conditions. Different how? Chen asked. Older, Harper explained. These systems predate the current galactic civilization by several millennia. They're from an earlier era when individual species developed their own unique approaches to terraforming. Admiral Park frowned. Are you saying the Council's technology isn't the pinnacle of galactic development? I'm saying it's the result of thousands of years of standardization and consolidation, Harper replied. They've taken the best elements from dozens of different species and created unified systems that work across the entire galaxy. But In doing so, they've lost some of the innovative diversity that made those original technologies so effective. Chun felt pieces clicking together in her mind. So by exiling us, they've given us access to abandoned technologies that might actually be superior to their current systems. In some ways, yes, Harper confirmed. The Zephyrian atmospheric processors, for example, could terraform a world in half the time it would take using standard Council equipment. And, since they're modular by design, we could adapt them for use on ships as advanced life support systems. Over the next several months, as the human fleet established its first permanent foothold in the Alpha Centauri system, a pattern began to emerge. Every abandoned system they surveyed contained evidence of older, more innovative technologies left behind by species that had long since been absorbed into the Council's standardized civilization. The Vorthan mining platforms in the Wolf 359 system used gravitational manipulation techniques that could revolutionize human industry. The Kalari research stations in the Epsilon Eridani system contained quantum computing systems that operated on principles human scientists had only theorized about. Each discovery added new capabilities to humanity's growing technological arsenal. But perhaps the most significant find came from an unexpected source. Commander Webb's survey of the Tau Ceti system revealed something that changed everything. A functioning council monitoring station that had been forgotten and left unmanned for over a century. It's a treasure trove of intelligence data, Webb reported via quantum transmission. Complete galactic star charts, detailed profiles of every council member species, military deployment records going back 500 years. Chen authorized an immediate investigation. The Defiance and her escort squadron made the journey to Tau Ceti in just over 2 weeks, using the improved faster-than-light drives that Dr. Harper's team had developed by combining human engineering principles with abandoned alien technology. The monitoring station hung in the void like a crystalline spider web, its exotic matter framework stretching across several kilometers of space. Sensors indicated the facility was still drawing power from a nearby neutron star, its automated systems continuing their endless watch over a sector of space that galactic civilization had long since moved beyond. "It's beautiful," Lieutenant Commander Sarah Park whispered as the away team's shuttle approached the station's docking bay. "Like a cathedral made of starlight." Chen had to agree. Council architecture possessed an ethereal quality that human builders had never quite achieved. But, as their shuttle settled into the docking cradle, she couldn't help noticing the subtle inefficiencies in the station's design. Redundant systems that could have been simplified. Structural elements that prioritized appearance over functionality. The station's interior was a maze of crystal corridors and floating platforms, all bathed in the soft blue glow of exotic matter conduits. Gravity seemed to shift and flow in patterns that followed artistic principles rather than practical considerations. It was impressive, certainly, but also wasteful in ways that human engineers would never tolerate. Dr. Harper led the technical team deeper into the facility while Chun and the military specialists focused on the intelligence archives. What they found exceeded every expectation. The monitoring station's databases contained detailed information on over 3,000 star systems, including complete tactical assessments of defensive capabilities, resource inventories, and population distributions. They learned that the Galactic Council's military forces were spread thin across thousands of light years, with most systems defended by little more than automated warning beacons. "They've grown lazy," Admiral Torres observed as they reviewed the data. 500 years of unchallenged supremacy has made them complacent. Their entire defensive strategy assumes that any potential threat will announce itself through normal diplomatic channels. Chen studied the deployment patterns with growing excitement. They have no contingency plans for a species that operates outside their established protocols. Their intelligence networks are focused on monitoring known civilizations for signs of rebellion or expansion beyond authorized limits. But they're not watching for entirely new players entering the game, Webb added with a grin. The station's historical archives revealed even more valuable intelligence. The Galactic Council wasn't the unified, harmonious alliance they portrayed themselves to be. Beneath the surface, dozens of member species harbored resentments, territorial disputes, and conflicting interests that were carefully managed through a complex web of treaties, and mutual dependencies. The hegemony of Vorth has been pushing for expanded mining rights in the Rigel sector for over 2 centuries, Dr. Harper reported as she compiled the political intelligence. The Crystalline Collective has consistently blocked those efforts, claiming environmental concerns, but the real issue seems to be control over rare element markets. And the Zephyrian Empire? Chen asked. Interesting case, Harper replied, bringing up a detailed profile. They're one of the Council's founding members, but they've been gradually withdrawing from galactic affairs for the past 300 years. Internal documents suggest they're facing some kind of cultural crisis, a loss of interest in expansion and exploration that's left them managing a vast but increasingly hollow empire. Chun absorbed this information with the strategic mind of a military commander. The Council's strength lay in their unity and technological superiority. But unity built on carefully managed tensions was inherently fragile, and technological superiority meant nothing if your enemy could innovate faster than you could adapt. We're not going to challenge them directly, she announced to the assembled team. At least not yet. We're going to build our strength in the shadows, using the technologies and territories they've abandoned. And when we're ready, we're going to show them what human innovation can accomplish. As the human fleet continued its expansion into the darkness beyond Sol, word of their exile spread throughout the galaxy in ways the Council had never anticipated. Trade networks carried rumors of the displaced humans to species that had never been considered for Council membership. Independent colonies on the galactic rim heard whispered stories of Earth's defiance and began to wonder what other options might exist. The Council had intended humanity's exile as a warning to other species, a demonstration of what happened to those who refused to conform to galactic civilization's established order. Instead, they had created something far more dangerous: hope. In the depths of space, far from the Council's watching eyes, Admiral Chun stood once again on the observation deck of the Defiance. But now, instead of watching Earth shrink behind them, she observed the growing lights of New Terra's first cities through the forward viewport. Humanity's new home was taking shape with remarkable speed, its orbital shipyards already beginning production of the next generation of human vessels. Ships that would be faster, more versatile, and more dangerous than anything the galaxy had seen in 1,000 years. Ships that would carry humanity's message to the stars: we are not going quietly into exile. The Galactic Council had made humanity an offer they thought couldn't be refused: submit to their authority or face isolation in the cosmic wilderness. They had been wrong about humanity's capacity for submission. Soon, they would learn they had also been wrong about the wilderness. In the darkness between the stars, something new was being born. Something that would challenge every assumption the galaxy held about power, civilization, and the proper order of things. The Council had exiled Earth to protect their established order. They had no idea they'd just signed its death warrant. 5 years had passed since humanity's exile, and the galaxy was beginning to notice something unusual happening in the dark spaces between Council territories. Trade routes that had operated unchanged for centuries started reporting strange encounters. Unidentified ships that appeared on sensors for moments before vanishing into hyperspace, leaving only the faintest trace of exotic energy signatures. Captain Zelthar, 9 of the Crystalline Collective merchant vessel Harmony's Edge, was reviewing his ship's sensor logs when his navigation officer detected another of these mysterious contacts. The unknown vessel had appeared near the edge of the Kepler 442 system, scanned his ship for exactly 37 seconds, then disappeared into what appeared to be a completely new form of faster-than-light travel. Analysis complete, Captain, his science officer reported, her crystalline form shimmering with nervous energy. The energy signature doesn't match any known Council drive system. The spatial distortion patterns suggest a hybrid technology combining Zephyrian quantum tunneling principles with something we've never encountered. Zelthar, 9 studied the sensor data with growing unease. The Crystalline Collective had been monitoring unusual activity throughout this region for months. Ships appearing where no ships should be. Abandoned Council facilities mysteriously losing contact with their automated monitoring systems. Strange energy readings from systems that should have been empty. Transmit our findings to the Council Intelligence Service, he ordered. Flag this as Priority 7, Potential Unknown Civilization Contact. What Captain Zelthar 9 didn't know was that his ship had just been evaluated by Commander Sarah Park, daughter of Admiral Park and captain of the U.S. Phantom. The newest class of human scout ships, the Phantom represented 5 years of intensive technological development, combining abandoned alien technologies with human innovation. Crystalline Collective Merchant Vessel, Park reported to her tactical officer. Standard configuration, minimal defensive capabilities, standard sensor suite. They detected us, but couldn't maintain lock for more than a few seconds. Lieutenant Torres, son of Fleet Admiral Torres and a rising star in humanity's new intelligence service, smiled grimly at his sensor display. That's the 5th Council ship this week that spotted us without being able to track us effectively. The stealth modifications are working perfectly. The Phantom-S stealth technology was one of humanity's greatest achievements since the Exile. Dr. Harper's research teams had discovered that Council sensor systems were designed to detect technologies they already understood. By creating hybrid systems that combined multiple alien technologies in ways no single species had ever attempted, human ships could operate at the edges of detection, visible enough to avoid accusations of using illegal cloaking devices, but difficult enough to track that they remained effectively invisible to Council surveillance networks. Commander Park's mission was part of Operation Lighthouse, humanity's systematic intelligence gathering effort throughout Council space. For 5 years, human scout ships had been mapping every major trade route, cataloging defensive installations, and identifying potential weaknesses in the galaxy's established order. Set course for the Arcturus sector, Park ordered. Intelligence reports suggest increased hegemony of Vorth military activity in that region. We need to determine if they're preparing for expansion or responding to something else. As the Phantom engaged its hybrid drive system and disappeared into the quantum foam, another drama was unfolding 300 light-years away in the Alpha Centauri system. New Terra had grown from a frontier colony into the capital of humanity's shadow empire, its orbital shipyards working around the chronometer to produce vessels that would have been impossible just years earlier. Admiral Chen stood in the command center of Olympus Station, humanity's primary military headquarters, watching live feeds from shipyards scattered across a dozen star systems. The numbers were staggering. Over 8,000 vessels of various classes, from nimble scouts to massive dreadnoughts that dwarfed anything in the Council fleet. The Prometheus-class battleships are exceeding all performance projections, reported Admiral Torres from his position at the Strategic Planning Console. The combination of Kalari quantum computing systems and Vorthan gravitational manipulation gives them capabilities that would have been considered impossible by Council standards. Chen nodded, studying the technical specifications with satisfaction. The Prometheus class represented everything humanity had learned about galactic warfare. Each ship could function as a carrier, battleship, or mobile command base, depending on its configuration. Their modular design allowed rapid reconfiguration for different mission types, while their advanced AI systems could coordinate fleet movements with a precision that no biological crew could match. But the ships were only part of humanity's growing strength. The discovery of abandoned technologies had accelerated human research and development in ways that would have taken centuries under normal circumstances. Human scientists weren't just adapting alien technologies. They were improving them, creating hybrid systems that surpassed the capabilities of their individual components. What's the status of Project Renaissance? Chen asked. Dr. Harper looked up from her workstation, her expression mixing excitement with concern. We've successfully integrated hegemony power generation systems with Zephyrian atmospheric processing technology. The result is a terraforming system that can transform a dead world into a garden paradise in less than 5 years. And the implications? We're no longer limited to naturally habitable worlds, Harper explained. Every system within our operational range becomes a potential colony site. We could expand our civilization faster than any species in galactic history. Chen absorbed this information while considering its strategic implications. Rapid expansion would give humanity the resource base necessary to challenge Council supremacy, but it would also make them impossible to ignore. The time was approaching when the shadows would no longer hide their activities. How many star systems are we currently developing? She asked. Admiral Park consulted his tactical display. 47 systems with active colonies, another 38 under preliminary development. Total human population is approaching 600 million, spread across 112 worlds. The numbers were impressive, but Chen knew they represented only the beginning. Humanity's exile had transformed them from a single system species into a distributed civilization that spanned hundreds of light years. The Council had intended to isolate them, but instead had forced them to become something unprecedented in galactic history, a nomadic empire that existed in the spaces between established territories. Admiral, Commander Webb approached with a priority transmission tablet. We're receiving an encrypted message from Operation Lighthouse. Commander Park reports contact with a potential ally. Chun felt her pulse quicken. For 5 years, human intelligence teams had been searching for signs of dissent within the Council's sphere of influence. They'd found plenty of evidence of internal tensions and competing interests, but nothing that suggested any species might be willing to openly oppose the established order. What kind of contact? Webb handed her the tablet. A faction within the hegemony of Vorth. Apparently, there are elements within their military hierarchy who have grown tired of Council restrictions on their expansion efforts. Chen studied the message with growing interest. The hegemony of Vorth was one of the Council's founding members, a militaristic species that had been gradually constrained by galactic law from pursuing their natural aggressive tendencies. If some among them were questioning that arrangement, it could represent the crack in Council unity that humanity had been waiting for. Arrange a meeting, she decided. Deep space, neutral territory. I want to hear what they have to say. The meeting took place in the Ross 128 system, a barren star with no habitable worlds that lay precisely halfway between human and Vorth territory. Admiral Chun arrived aboard the UES Defiance, now upgraded with the latest human technology, but still bearing the scars of exile that had transformed it into humanity's flagship. The Vorth delegation arrived in a formation of 3 heavy cruisers, their angular hulls gleaming with the aggressive aesthetics that characterized their military design philosophy. Chen couldn't help but notice that their ships, while impressive, showed signs of technological stagnation that confirmed human intelligence assessments. General Krax Vorth materialized on the Defiance's bridge via holographic projection, his massive form imposing even as a light-based image. The Vorth were essentially humanoid, but larger and more heavily muscled, with biomechanical modifications that enhanced their natural warrior capabilities. Admiral Chun, Krax Vorth's translator, rendered his gravelly voice into standard Galactic. I confess surprise at humanity's survival. The Council expected your species to collapse within cycles of exile. The Council underestimated human adaptability, Chen replied diplomatically. We're curious about what brings a respected Vorth general to seek contact with exiled humans. Krax Vorth's expression shifted to what Chen recognized as amusement among his species. Respected, perhaps, but increasingly frustrated by Council restrictions that prevent the hegemony from achieving its natural destiny, which is expansion, conquest, the natural right of the strong to claim territory from the weak. Krax Vorth replied without hesitation. The Council preaches harmony and cooperation, but they use those concepts to maintain a status quo that benefits only the founding species. Chen found herself liking the Vorth general's directness, even if she disagreed with his philosophy. And you believe humanity might share your interests in changing that arrangement? Your species was exiled for refusing to submit to Council authority, Krax Vorth observed. That suggests a strength of will that the hegemony respects. We're curious about your capabilities after 5 cycles of independent development. Chun gestured toward the viewport, where human escort ships maintained protective formation around the Defiance. We've learned to make the most of our situation. Krax Vorth studied the human vessels with professional interest. Unusual configurations. Your ship designs don't match any known Council patterns. We found it advantageous to think differently than our former associates, Chen replied carefully. What followed was the first of several diplomatic exchanges that would reshape the balance of power in local space. The Vorth weren't interested in joining humanity's hidden empire, but They were willing to share intelligence about Council military deployments in exchange for access to human-developed technologies that might give them advantages in future expansion efforts. The arrangement was mutually beneficial but dangerous. Any evidence of cooperation between exiled humanity and a Council member species would trigger immediate military intervention. Both sides would need to proceed with extreme caution. Over the following months, a delicate game of shadow diplomacy began to develop. Vorth military units found themselves facing unexpected technical failures that required emergency repairs at remote facilities that happened to be operated by independent contractors with suspicious technological capabilities. Human research teams gained access to current Council military specifications through Vorth intermediaries who claimed to be updating their own defensive systems. The intelligence that flowed from this arrangement revealed a galaxy on the brink of significant change. The Council's unity was more fragile than it appeared from the outside. Several member species were becoming increasingly dissatisfied with their roles in the galactic hierarchy, while others worried about the long-term sustainability of a civilization that had grown stagnant through success. The Zephyrian Empire is the most interesting case, Dr. Harper reported during one of the weekly intelligence briefings. They're gradually withdrawing from Council activities, but not because they're planning rebellion. They're experiencing something we might call civilizational exhaustion. Admiral Chen studied the psychological profiles that human intelligence had compiled on various Council species. Explain that. They've achieved everything their species ever aspired to, Harper continued. Galactic influence, technological mastery, unlimited resources, peace, and prosperity across thousands of worlds. But the process of achieving those goals over several millennia has left them without new challenges to pursue. They're bored, Admiral Park asked incredulously. More than that, Harper replied. They're losing their sense of purpose. Birth rates are declining. Artistic and scientific innovation has stagnated. They're managing a vast empire, but no longer remember why they wanted it in the first place. Chun felt pieces of a larger strategy beginning to form in her mind. The Council's greatest weakness wasn't military or technological, it was psychological. They'd created a galactic civilization that was too successful for its own good, leaving its member species without the challenges that drove innovation and growth. What about the other founding species? She asked. The Crystalline Collective is facing similar issues, though they're responding by becoming increasingly focused on trade and resource management, Harper replied. The hegemony of Vorth is the exception. They're still driven by expansion instincts, but those instincts are being frustrated by Council restrictions. And the newer member species? Generally more dynamic, but they're constrained by their junior status in the Council hierarchy, Harper explained. They provide the energy and innovation that keeps the Council functioning, but they don't have the political influence to direct galactic policy. Chen studied this information for several minutes, considering its implications for humanity's long-term strategy. The galaxy wasn't facing an external threat that could be defeated through military action. It was experiencing an internal crisis that required a fundamentally different approach. We're not going to conquer the galaxy, she announced to the surprised assembly. We're going to revitalize it. The plan that emerged from those strategic discussions would have seemed impossible just months earlier. But humanity's 5 years in exile had taught them to think beyond conventional limitations. Instead of challenging the Council directly, they would offer something the galaxy desperately needed but had forgotten how to create: genuine innovation and the excitement of new possibilities. Operation Renaissance launched 6 months later with the establishment of what appeared to be independent research stations in unclaimed star systems throughout Council space. These facilities, operated by shell corporations with no obvious connection to humanity, offered breakthrough technologies to any species willing to engage in joint development projects. The response exceeded all expectations. Within a year, over 40 different species had established research partnerships with the mysterious independent contractors. Few suspected that they were actually working with human scientists who had spent years studying and improving abandoned Council technologies. The innovations that emerged from these partnerships began to transform galactic civilization in subtle but significant ways. Faster communication networks allowed previously isolated colonies to participate in interstellar culture. Advanced manufacturing systems made luxury goods available to species that had been excluded from the galactic economy. New transportation technologies opened up regions of space that had been considered too remote for development. "We're not just building an empire," Admiral Chun observed as she reviewed reports from operations across the galaxy. "We're building the foundation for a completely new kind of galactic civilization." Dr. Harper nodded enthusiastically. "The hybrid technologies we're developing don't just combine different species innovations. They create emergent properties that none of the original technologies possessed. We're witnessing genuine evolutionary leaps in galactic development." But perhaps the most significant development was the growing network of communication between species that had previously been isolated by council bureaucracy. The independent research stations served as neutral meeting grounds where representatives from dozens of different civilizations could interact without the formal constraints of council protocol. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy was beginning to think collectively about possibilities that transcended the existing political order. Small groups of visionary individuals from various species started discussing concepts that would have been unthinkable under the council system. Genuine cooperation based on shared innovation rather than enforced compliance. Admiral Chun received the first direct communication from one of these groups exactly 7 years after humanity's exile. The message came through encrypted channels from a research station in the Vega sector, signed by representatives of 12 different species. "We know who you are," the message read. "We know what you're doing, and we want to help you do it better." As Chun studied the list of species and individuals who had signed the message, she realized that humanity's exile had accomplished something far more significant than just their survival. It had catalyzed the formation of the first genuinely voluntary interstellar alliance in galactic history. The Council had exiled Earth to preserve their established order. Instead, they had inadvertently created the seeds of its replacement. In the depths of space, far from the ancient capitals of galactic power, something unprecedented was being born. A civilization built on innovation, cooperation, and the radical idea that the galaxy's greatest achievements still lay in the future rather than the past. The Shadow Empire had grown beyond humanity's wildest dreams. Soon, it would be ready to step into the light. 10 years had passed since the Galactic Council's fateful decision to exile humanity, and the galaxy was no longer the same place. What had begun as punishment for one defiant species had evolved into something the Council's founders could never have anticipated, a quiet revolution that was transforming the very nature of interstellar civilization. Counselor Vex Prime of the Crystalline Collective studied the intelligence reports with growing concern from his office in the Council chambers on Nexus Prime. The documents spread across his crystalline desk painted a picture of galactic change that challenged every assumption about the established order. 17 new interstellar alliances formed in the past solar cycle, his aide summarized nervously. 43 species have withdrawn from Council oversight programs. Trade routes are being reorganized around new hub systems that didn't exist 5 years ago. Vex Prime's crystalline form flickered with agitation. And our intelligence services still have no clear picture of what's driving these changes. The patterns suggest coordination, but we can't identify the organizing force, his aide admitted. The new alliances all claim to be voluntary associations formed for mutual research and development. Their activities appear legal under galactic law. Appear legal, Vex Prime repeated with growing irritation. But something is organizing this transformation. Species don't spontaneously decide to abandon systems that have maintained galactic peace for millennia. What Counselor Vex Prime couldn't see was the vast network of communication and cooperation that had grown from humanity's initial exile. The independent research stations had evolved into something unprecedented, a loose confederation of innovative species working together to develop technologies and social structures that transcended traditional boundaries. Admiral Sarah Chun, now promoted to Supreme Commander of what had become known as the Terran Federation, stood in the command center of New Geneva Station orbiting New Terra. The holographic displays around her showed a galaxy in transition, with new trade routes, research partnerships, and voluntary alliances reshaping the political landscape. Status report from all sectors, she requested from her staff. Commander Sarah Park, now Admiral Park and leader of the Federation's diplomatic corps, activated the central display. The Proxima Alliance now includes 37 species spanning 400 star systems. The Vega Cooperative has grown to 51 species across 600 systems. The Centauri Association represents over 60 species managing trade relations across the entire galactic rim. The numbers were staggering, but Chen knew they represented more than simple expansion. Each alliance was built on principles that directly challenged the Council's hierarchical model: voluntary participation, shared innovation, and mutual benefit rather than centralized control. What about Council response? She asked. Admiral Torres, now serving as the Federation's Minister of Intelligence, grimaced slightly. Increasing desperation. They're trying to maintain control through administrative pressure and economic incentives, but they're finding that their member species have alternatives now. The hegemony of Vorth's situation is particularly interesting, Admiral Webb added from his position at the Strategic Planning Console. General Kraxvorth has been promoted to Supreme Military Commander, but his forces are increasingly focused on exploration and expansion rather than enforcement of Council directives. Chen nodded with satisfaction. The Vorth Alliance had proven to be one of humanity's most valuable partnerships. Their military expertise combined with human innovation had created exploration fleets that were opening up previously unknown regions of the galaxy at an unprecedented pace. New contact reports? She inquired. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, now Director of Xenological Research, highlighted several regions of the galactic display. 37 previously unknown civilizations contacted in the past year alone. Most are species that developed independently, but never made contact with the Council due to distance or technological limitations. And their responses to Federation contact? Overwhelmingly positive, Harper replied with evident excitement. They're fascinated by our alliance model. Most had assumed that galactic civilization required submission to a central authority. The idea that advanced species can cooperate as equals is revolutionary to them. Chen studied the display with mixed feelings of pride and concern. The Federation had grown far beyond what anyone could have imagined 10 years earlier. But that growth was creating new challenges. Managing voluntary alliances across hundreds of species required entirely different skills than commanding a unified military force. The Council is going to respond eventually, she observed. They can't continue to pretend that these changes are temporary fluctuations in the galactic order. As if summoned by her words, Admiral Park's communication console chimed with an incoming priority transmission. The source identifier showed it was coming from Nexus Prime, the Council's capital world. Supreme Commander Chun, Park announced formally. We're receiving a direct communication from the Galactic Council. They're requesting diplomatic contact. Chun felt her pulse quicken. After 10 years of operating in the shadows, the moment of direct confrontation had finally arrived. On screen, the central holographic display shimmered and resolved into the image of three figures Chun recognized from intelligence reports. Counselor Vex Prime of the Crystalline Collective, Archon Zex, 9 of the Zephyrian Empire, and Commander Prime Orthvex of the Hegemony of Vorth. The most senior leadership of the three founding species, representing the ultimate authority in galactic civilization. Admiral Chun, Counselor Vex Prime began without preamble. We believe it is time for our species to resume diplomatic contact. Chun maintained her expression of neutral professionalism while her mind raced through possible motivations for the Council's approach. Counselor Vex Prime, I wasn't aware that humanity had been restored to the Council's recognition. The situation has become more complex than our original decision anticipated. Archon Zex, 9 interjected, his ancient voice carrying undertones of exhaustion that Chen found intriguing. Galactic circumstances require reconsideration of previous policies. We're prepared to discuss revised terms for human participation in galactic civilization, Commander Prime Orthvex added, though Chen could detect reluctance in the Vorth leader's tone. Chen exchanged glances with her senior staff before responding. The offer was significant, acknowledgement that the Council's exile policy had failed and that humanity's position had become too important to ignore. But It also represented a potential trap that could undermine everything the Federation had built. That's very generous, she replied carefully. But I'm afraid the situation may have evolved beyond simple restoration of previous arrangements. Vex Prime's crystalline form flickered with what Chen recognized as confusion. I'm not certain I understand your meaning, Admiral. 10 years ago, you exiled humanity from galactic civilization, Chen explained. In response, we were forced to develop new approaches to interstellar cooperation. Those approaches have proven popular with other species. The unauthorized alliances, Archon Zex, 9 said with obvious distaste. Irregular arrangements that undermine established galactic order. Voluntary partnerships between sovereign species, Chen corrected, built on principles of mutual benefit and shared innovation rather than hierarchical control. Commander Prime Orthvex leaned forward aggressively. You're describing anarchy, Admiral. Galactic civilization requires order, structure, unified authority. Does it? Chen challenged. Or does galactic civilization require cooperation, innovation, and respect for the autonomy of member species? The question hung in the space between them like a weapon. For millennia, the Council had operated on the assumption that their hierarchical model was the only viable form of interstellar government. The Federation's success challenged that fundamental assumption. The galaxy has known peace and prosperity under Council authority, Vex Prime stated, but his tone lacked its earlier confidence. The galaxy has known stagnation and frustration under Council authority, Chen replied. Peace through suppression of natural development. Prosperity through restriction of innovation. You've created a galactic civilization that's forgotten how to grow. Archon Zex9's expression shifted to something Chen couldn't quite identify. And you believe your Federation offers a superior alternative. I believe our Federation offers choice, Chen said simply. Species can participate in galactic civilization without surrendering their autonomy. They can contribute to collective progress while pursuing their own development paths. They can cooperate without being controlled. The Council representatives exchanged glances that spoke of hurried conferences and desperate strategic sessions. Chen could sense that they were facing pressures she couldn't fully understand. Internal dissent, external challenges, and the growing realization that their traditional approaches were no longer adequate for the galaxy they had created. What are your terms? Commander Prime Orthvex asked finally. Chen had been preparing for this moment for years, but the reality of it still sent adrenaline coursing through her system. Recognition of the Federation as a legitimate galactic entity with full sovereignty over member species and territories. Establishment of formal diplomatic relations between the Council and Federation as equal powers. Restructuring of galactic law to accommodate multiple governmental models. Impossible, Vex Prime responded immediately. The Council cannot recognize a rival authority that undermines the foundation of galactic order. Then, I'm afraid we have nothing further to discuss, Chen replied with polite finality. The Federation will continue developing its own approach to interstellar civilization. As the transmission ended, Chen felt a mixture of disappointment and relief. Part of her had hoped for a peaceful resolution that would avoid the confrontation that seemed increasingly inevitable. But she also knew that the Council's inability to adapt to changing circumstances made conflict unavoidable. Analysis? She asked her staff. Admiral Torres consulted his intelligence assessments. They're facing increasing pressure from member species questioning the Council's authority. Our diplomatic channels suggest that at least 30 Council species are seriously considering Federation membership. Military assessment. Admiral Webb brought up tactical displays showing force dispositions across known space. Council military forces significantly outnumber Federation fleets, but they're designed for policing actions against primitive species. Our vessels are specifically designed for combat against peer opponents with advanced technology. Chen studied the tactical information while considering strategic options. Direct military confrontation would be devastating for both sides and contrary to everything the Federation represented. But the Council's refusal to acknowledge change meant that some form of conflict was inevitable. Recommendations? Dr. Harper activated a different display showing economic and social trends across the galaxy. We continue doing what we're doing, but more openly. No more shadow operations. Full diplomatic contact with any species interested in Federation principles. Force the Council to either adapt or reveal themselves as the oppressive authority they've become. The strategy that emerged from those discussions would later be called the Open Hand Gambit, a complete abandonment of secrecy combined with aggressive expansion of Federation principles throughout the galaxy. Instead of hiding their activities, humanity and its allies began openly promoting their alternative model of galactic civilization. The response was immediate and dramatic. Within months, dozens of Council member species formally requested Federation observer status. Independent species that had never been approached by the Council began joining Federation alliances. Even some of the ancient civilizations that had helped found the Council started questioning whether their original vision had been corrupted by millennia of institutional inertia. The tipping point came when the Zephyrian Empire announced its withdrawal from active Council participation. Archon Zex-9's final address to the Council Assembly became legendary for its stark assessment of galactic civilization stagnation. "We created the Council to bring order to chaos," Zex-9 declared. "Instead, we created bureaucracy that strangles innovation. We sought to unite the galaxy in common purpose. Instead, we imposed conformity that destroys the diversity that makes unity worthwhile." The Zephyrian withdrawal didn't immediately trigger the Council's collapse, but it shattered the illusion of unified authority that had maintained galactic order for millennia. Within a year, the Crystalline Collective announced its own reform program that closely resembled Federation principles. The hegemony of Vorth split into factions, with the expansionist elements under General Kraxvorth openly allying with the Federation. 5 years later, Admiral Sarah Chun stood once again in the command center of New Geneva Station. But the galaxy displayed on the holographic screens around her bore little resemblance to the one she'd known at the beginning of humanity's exile. Instead of a single hierarchical civilization governed by the Council, dozens of voluntary alliances and confederations shared space in a complex web of cooperation and friendly competition. "Status report from all sectors," she requested, though the question now meant something completely different than it had 15 years earlier. Admiral Park consulted displays showing diplomatic activity across hundreds of star systems. The Renaissance Alliance is negotiating technological exchanges with the Outer Rim Cooperative. The Core Worlds Federation is establishing joint research stations with the Independent Systems Alliance. The Reformed Council has requested mediation assistance for their internal restructuring efforts. The transformation was staggering. Where once the galaxy had been divided between Council members and excluded species, now dozens of different governmental models coexisted in a dynamic equilibrium that promoted innovation while maintaining peace. The old Council still existed, but as one alliance among many rather than the supreme galactic authority. "Human population?" Chen asked. "Approaching 2 billion across 430 star systems," Admiral Torres reported. "But population numbers are becoming less relevant as species barriers continue to diminish." It was true. One of the most unexpected developments of the post-Council era had been the emergence of truly multi-species communities. Federation principles had encouraged cooperation between species in ways that transcended traditional boundaries, creating colonies and research stations where humans, Vorth, Zephyrians, and dozens of other species worked together as equals. Contact reports. Dr. Harper highlighted distant regions of the galactic display. First contact with 3 previously unknown galactic civilizations in the past year. All expressed interest in Federation principles after observing our diplomatic model. Chen smiled at the irony. The galaxy that had once seemed limited to the regions controlled by the Council was revealing itself to be far larger and more diverse than anyone had imagined. New civilizations were emerging from previously unexplored regions, attracted by news of a galactic community that welcomed diversity rather than demanding conformity. And the Council's former leadership? Admiral Webb consulted his political intelligence reports. Counselor Vex Prime has accepted a position as diplomatic liaison between the Crystalline Collective and the Federation. Commander Prime Orthvex leads the Vorth exploration fleets that are opening up new regions of the galaxy. Archon Zex Nine has retired to pursue what he calls philosophical archaeology, studying the early history of galactic civilization to understand how it lost its original vision. The transformation of their former enemies into allies and partners represented perhaps the greatest achievement of Federation diplomacy. Rather than destroying the old order, they had helped it evolve into something better suited to the galaxy's needs. A soft chime from the communication console interrupted Chen's reflections. Admiral Park looked up with an expression of amazement. Supreme Commander, we're receiving a transmission from the Galactic Heritage Foundation. They're requesting permission to establish a memorial to humanity's exile on New Terra. Chun felt a complex mixture of emotions as she considered the request. The Galactic Heritage Foundation was the successor organization to the old Council Archives, dedicated to preserving the history of interstellar civilization. Their request represented the final transformation of humanity's exile, from shameful punishment to honored catalyst for galactic renewal. Approved, she decided. But make sure the memorial includes recognition of all the species that suffered under the old system. Humanity's exile was just the spark that ignited changes that were already inevitable. As the shift ended and Chun prepared to return to her quarters, she took one last look at the galactic display showing the vibrant network of alliances and partnerships that had replaced the Council's rigid hierarchy. The stars that had once seemed hostile and forbidding now sparkled with the promise of infinite possibilities. The Galactic Council had exiled Earth to preserve their established order. Instead, they had created the catalyst for the greatest expansion of interstellar civilization in galactic history. The galaxy that emerged from humanity's exile was larger, more diverse, more innovative, and more free than the one that had cast them out. In trying to silence one defiant voice, they had awakened a chorus of possibilities that would echo across the stars for millennia to come. The age of imposed order was over. The age of chosen cooperation had begun. And, at the heart of it all, the blue marble of Earth continued its ancient orbit around a yellow star, no longer alone in the darkness, but surrounded by a constellation of new worlds where humanity and its allies were writing the next chapter of galactic history. The species that had been deemed unworthy of civilization had instead shown the galaxy what civilization could become. The exile was over. The Renaissance had begun, and the stars themselves bore witness to the transformation of a galaxy that had rediscovered the courage to dream of something better than what had come before. In the end, the Council's greatest failure had become the galaxy's greatest gift, the knowledge that even the most established order could be peacefully transformed by the simple power of choosing cooperation over coercion, innovation over stagnation, and hope over fear. The human empire they had tried to prevent had indeed risen among the stars. But it had risen not as a threat to galactic civilization, but as its salvation.